Welcome to this episode of Pen to Paper Press Podcast. I am Cindy Kochis. I enjoy talking with best-selling authors, writers, editors, publishers, and creative souls about the process of developing our stories to completing our works of art. Each episode is an opportunity for us to explore mindsets, pearls of wisdom, and the experiences that began our journey as an author from the moment we put pen to paper. It is an honor to have Dr. Robert Saul in the studio. Bob has been guiding the physical, behavioral, and mental care of children for over 40 years. He is the author of My Children's Children, Raising Young Citizens in the Age of Columbine, All About Children, Thinking Developmentally, Nourishing Wellness in Childhood to Promote Lifelong Health, Conscious Parenting Using the Parental Awareness Threshold. Welcome, Bob. It's good to have you here.
Well, thank you. It's my pleasure. It's I bring a unique perspective, I think, to the whole process of trying to be an author, and having come at it a different way as a professional. But I'm glad to share some of that journey with you today.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And prior to our interview, before we got online, I spent a little bit of time on your website, and the last paragraph of your blog post titled Forgiveness, Field of Dreams Style, it caught my attention, and I want to take a moment to acknowledge what you wrote. Forgiveness is essential as we strive to improve ourselves and the lives of our fellow citizens. Let's pay attention to the signs that can provide the guidepost for us to recognize our current situation and make the positive change. This change, forgiving ourselves first, must occur before we make a difference. That's beautiful. Forgiveness of self and others is so important.
Well, that's been a significant part of my journey in terms of learning forgiveness, learning about forgiveness, practicing and trying to weave that into sort of all my writing narratives.
Mm-hmm. So one thing I wanted to ask, and as I mentioned during our pre-interview conversation, a lot of my questions come intuitively, and this was one of the very first ones that I wrote down, and it is, what occurred in your life that motivated your decision to begin writing books?
There actually was an epiphany.
Okay.
Let me go back for just a minute. I graduated from medical school, did pediatric training, actually did medical genetics training, and once I got into practice, was very involved with professional and kept very busy doing that. After about 13, 15 years, realized that I wasn't paying back to the community like I should be. I thought I was being a very good physician, caring for patients and doing all those things, but that there needed to be a more global sense of my involvement in the community. At the same time, this was back in 1993. I remember very specifically. I went to a talk, and a healthcare futurist said 12 words that have had a profound impact on me ever since. He said, for anything that happens in your community, think, I am the problem, I am the solution, I am the resource. That was just, wow. I mean, that means that whatever's going on, I need to take ownership in it. I can't be their problem. Mm-hmm. It can't be, they've got to fix it. No, it's got to be, I've got to take ownership in it also. And for me to solve the problem, to be the solution, I need to devote my resources to it. So it took me actually a couple months to internalize that enough to go to the end of the community and say, put me in. I'm ready to do some work. What can I do as more of a citizen than as a physician? And I'd like to think that as a physician, I had maybe a little bit of a bully pulpit that I could use to promote some stuff. And I was very involved. And then 6 years later, Columbine hit. two teenagers go into a school, murder 13 people, and kill themselves. Could that happen in my community? Yes, and actually it had happened.
Oh.
What have I done to make a difference with that? The obvious introspection was not enough. So I sat down and put pencil to paper. Back then we used to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And wrote an op-ed article for the local newspaper. And it just sort of flowed. I came up with what I considered to be the 5 steps to community improvement. And over the next 13 years, I wrote over 160 op-ed articles for the local newspaper.
Wonderful.
about those 5 steps to community improvement. And so as I would write those every week, and I'll get to the 5 steps in just a minute. As I would write those every week, I would realize that what it really is I'm writing it for myself. This is, in some ways, was sort of a journal entry. What do I need to be doing? What are the action steps for me? Sometimes I used to let my wife read them, and I stopped doing that. But sometimes I used ahead of time, and she would say, "Ooh, I don't know about this one. It sounds a little preachy." I said, "I don't know. You don't understand who I'm preaching to." And she'd go, "What?" I'm preaching to myself. And if it has some impact for others, great.
Yes.
So that really set me on that journey. So that was in late 1999, and then I published a book sort of all those op-ed articles back in 2013. But the 5, if I could, I'd love to tell you sort of the 5 steps to community improvement, because that sort of it encompasses everything I'm sort of doing going forward.
Of course.
1, learn to be the best parent you can be. And I choose those words carefully. Parenting is a lifelong journey of learning.
Mm-hmm.
So learn to be. It's not innate. It's not really intuitive, I think. You really need to continue to learn the process. To be the best parent you could be. Not everyone has the same set of circumstances.
Right.
So it's easy for me to sit in a pediatric office and tell parents what they should be doing. They might not have the financial resources, the socioeconomic resources, the family resources necessary to do some of those things. So my job is to help nurture that process for them so they could be the best parent they could be. Number 2 was get involved. So that's intuitive with I am the problem, I am the solution, I am the resource. Number 3 was stay involved. I think those are 2 different things. It's easy sometimes to get involved.
Yes.
Sustaining that involvement because things will change. So you have to sort of adapt with that. Number 4 is probably the most intuitive of all of these. Love for your fellow man. Yet it's the most difficult right now in terms of our polarized society.
Yes.
We've sort of lost track of that. And then number 5 was forgiveness. And I think that's the toughest one.
It is tough. It is. That is one of the tougher ones.
I have to admit those from Maury Schwartz's words from Tuesdays with Maury, if you've ever read that book.
Yep.
And one of the significant takeaways from that book was forgive yourself first for what you're thinking or what you've been doing or what you haven't been doing. Mm-hmm. Forgive others and do it now.
Yes.
And the whole point about forgiveness is it again, that's a real journey also. I mean, your 4-year-old whacks your 2-year-old and you tell the 4-year-old to tell the 2-year-old you're sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Well, that's an apology, but hopefully that gets different by the time the child's 14, 24, 44, 84. So we've hopefully learned to modulate and improve our ability to forgive ourselves, to forgive others, and do it now. But that, we will be in and out of that process. It's very difficult at times. I mean, I've read a lot about the genocide in Rwanda, where hundreds of thousands of people were murdered by their fellow countrymen. And the process of forgiveness in those communities as they've had to release some of those murderers back into the community because they just didn't have enough jail space, or the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa. These are difficult processes, but if we're going to move on in our lives, it's so important. And I'll say one other thing about forgiveness, because before we get to some of the other books, is we really need to be thinking about social or communal forgiveness also.
Yes.
The American Medical Association, some years past, did not allow Black physicians to be a part of the organization.
Okay.
And they subsequently changed that. And the easy thing for the folks to say is, well, it wasn't me. Those other people in the past did it. But about 15 plus years ago, they wrote an article admitting their organizational faults and saying, yes, it wasn't me, but it was us. And that is so important as we go forward, because I think it helps us set our individual and group moral compasses, reset them going forward. So social forgiveness is so important. Again, it's so easy to say, well, it wasn't me. And that's particularly difficult in the South now because of the Confederacy and some of the Confederate war symbols. It wasn't me. They put them up there. But if it should change, then we should be a part of that process of change. So those were the 5 steps that I published that in the first book, My Children's Children, Raising Young Citizens in the Age of Columbine, because to me, one of the things I think we've lost track of is being citizens. That is, people that care about each other, care for each other, empathize, understand, and are willing to do what's necessary for the common good. And so that's the whole point of the first book.
It's been a wild ride these last handful of years in regards to that, and it's interesting how our conversation kind of went from forgiveness in a small to a very expansive arena. So,
well, that journey, that first book, and that all those steps, and especially forgiveness. The children's book that came out of that was really a sort of what I call an atypical children's book, because it's just a series of 13 illustrations about what you can be doing within your community to be making a difference and within your family. It was beautifully illustrated by Jan Yellick Betts, and I call it Goodnight Moon with a Message, because it's really just a picture book, but there's text in there that hopefully parents and children alike can pull from that.
Yeah.
Subsequently published a more scientific book with the co-authored, I should say, a more scientific book with the American Academy of Pediatrics. But then the last book about conscious parenting really does fold in about forgiveness and the whole aspect of being conscious of where you are in your parenting journey, and how we can do better and try to understand how we can get we can understand what our children are doing, and how our children can understand what we're doing as we all try to do better.
Yeah, and I was going to bring that book up. It was something that I wanted to explore, because I've raised 2 sons. I have 3 grandsons, and that is something that is important to be aware of, is how are we consciously parenting? Are we conscious of how we're parenting? That is maybe more of an important question. Or are we just, going with, with what's going on in our environment and not paying attention to how it affects our children? And, well, in my case, grandchildren. And so what are some of the useful signposts that we can use or that you discovered along the way in regards to this?
Let me back up for just a second, because let me tell you how I got to the conscious parenting concept.
Please. Yes, please.
Late in my career, about 8 years ago, I took a job with a health system, and being one of the leaders there, they had a leadership forum called Conscious Leadership. A fellow by the name of Jim Dethmer and his group out of Chicago. Very exciting sort of work. And I just gleaned a little bit out of that. And they, they have what they call a line. And when we're above the line, we're open, we're receptive, we're ready to learn. When we're below the line, we're closed, we're defensive, and we're always right.
Interesting way of putting it, and that makes a lot of sense.
And the whole point about conscious leadership is just knowing where you are. I mean, we're all going to be above and below at times.
Yes.
I mean, we've all been in that meeting, saying to ourselves, when is this thing going to be over? This is so boring. I can't wait for this to be done. And so if you're conscious about that, you can either just decide to stay there, or you can say, whoops, I need to try to change my responses and be more involved here.
Yes.
And so you can go from being below the line to above the line. I think so I thought this is really what parenting to me is all about. Being consciously aware of where you are in your relationship with your child. For the line, I use the parental awareness threshold, or for the football people in the crowd, the acronym PAT. When you're above the PAT, you're open, you're receptive, you're ready to learn, you're ready to listen to your child. When you're below, you're closed, you're defensive, and I'm right, and because I said so. And the point is just knowing how to sort of, if you're below the line, how to get above the line, how to get above the parental awareness threshold. And that's tough at times, because there's so many things. And that's where the whole point of being consciously aware of where things are. There's lots of books that are written that are titled Conscious Parenting. Mine is purposely a little different. Mine is just a little short manual, not very big. But it's meant to be digestible. It's meant to be able to be returned to, because I think the concepts are very helpful. The point about conscious parenting is you want to be able to always learn, always try to understand things and alter your responses accordingly, and to help you in terms of the parental awareness threshold. Whenever anything's happening needs a parental response, pause, then assess, and then choose. Now, you might choose the wrong response. So,
we are human.
So we all have. And so you need to, it's really two things. It's what happens in the moment, and then the ability to sort of look back in retrospect later, whether that's hours or days later, say, what I did then, I really am not happy with how that turned out. So this is what I probably should do going forward. If it's appropriate, it might even be appropriate to issue an apology to the child.
Yes.
But to understand sort of where you are. And again, I use several examples in the book. One, the 1-year-old is sitting in the high chair, throwing peas on the floor. That just seems like such an innocent act. I mean, it's so cute. They're playing with their food. But for you, that might just be the straw that broke the camel's back. You've just had a long day. There's been different things happening in your family. Maybe you've had a struggle with your spouse or with your children or with work or whatever. And your response to that might not be appropriate. So hopefully later you could say, okay, that wasn't right. What can I do? Or you're arguing with your 4-year-old over vegetables. It's time to pause. Is this, the 4-year-old really doesn't understand about the vegetables? Is this the right argument to be having at this point in time? And sort of the class. And so I give examples from birth to late teens in terms of how parents can sort of look at things, but it's not a complete how-to guide. I mean, you can't pick it up and say, what happens when my child does this? But the one example I do give is when say after school, mother picks up the child, goes through the drive-through, gets a nice big drink and says, don't spill this. 2 miles down the road, Mom, my drink spilled. Your immediate answer is just, and you pull over and you're ready to just really get angry and start the cleanup process. Well, what happened was when you took that one turn, the book bag knocked the drink over. So if you had paused, assessed, maybe the path you've chosen would have been a little different than just yelling and screaming and starting the cleanup mess and making your child feel bad. Now, it still might have been the child's problem, but rather than fly off the handle, let's think about the responses that'll make more sense and be more positive going forward. Because remember, one of the big things about discipline is people sometimes equate discipline to punishment. I don't like that. The root word for discipline is disciple, which means to teach. So the whole point of discipline should be a teaching experience. Now, there's times when your child might do something life-threatening, might run away from mom's arms or dad's arms and out into traffic. Well, that's a life-threatening thing, and there's going to have to be a response.
Yes.
But most of the time, it's that pause, assess, and choose, and try to think in the moment, what can I do now? And then in retrospect, if I didn't do as well as I could have, what could I do differently? I like to use the example of, and I don't say this to pat myself on the back, but it's one of those things where I think my child was 7 or 8 and he did something I didn't like one night and I yelled at him. Well, he just turned into a puddle. And I felt badly. And my wife got mad at me for yelling. And then we went into one of those family meltdown modes where nobody talks for a period of time. And then things settled down. And I put my son to bed and I said, son, I'm so sorry. You did something I did not think was right, but Dad was so inappropriate. And I really want to apologize because my response was totally wrong. And we're in this together. And he said, Dad, would you be quiet? I said, wait. He said, I hate it when you're nice. So I'd like to think that I was this whole idea of conscious parenting has been brewing for a while, and sort of a lot of things came out in terms of my whole writing journey and my leadership journey, and all of those things have led to this nugget that I call conscious parenting, using the parental awareness threshold.
Well, and it takes a lifetime of experience to be able to guide, those that are not as experienced as you are, and being able to grant them that experience through your writing and so forth is giving, as you say, giving back to the community. Here, this is what I've been through. This is what I see works, doesn't work. And, here's some solutions. Here's some options. Here's some ideas. Here's some things to consider. As you said, you're not writing a how-to book. This is not like do XYZ and get XYZ, results. There is no such thing for parenting because everybody's situations are so different, and you throw in emotions and our own baggage from how we were parented. There it would it I don't think you could write this is how you do it kind of a book. So I like that you have offered solutions. So
and that's it. And I mean, one of the plays I dearly love is Dear Evan Hansen, and it just came out in a movie. But at the end, I realized that one part of my role, especially as a physician and counselor, in many ways, is to just gently peer behind the curtain and see what I can do to be of some assistance, instead of rip it back and say, this is what you need to do. And so that has, in many ways, I mean, that's been a journey for me. I mean, when you come out of medical school, when you come out of training in your early years, you sort of, it. I mean, and then you realize, no, there's lots of different variations on a theme here. And how can I mean, even though I consider myself a parenting expert, oftentimes my interactions in the office, everyone has to be a little different as I try to see how I can impart some of that wisdom, if you will, into the parental things. And I realize that's a process too, that I have, for a lot of the families that I've dealt with in the years past, it's been them establishing trust in me and me establishing trust in them to be able to give them information that they felt comfortable with. I retired the end of last year, which was a very difficult process because the relationships one forms as a pediatrician are indeed significant bonds. But I continue to be active. And it's interesting that my first title, My Children's Children, was purposely sort of my children's children would be my grandchildren.
Right.
The second level of my children's children would be all the children that I've cared for. My third level of my children's children is all the children that I've advocated for over the years. So I'd like to think that that I've worked in the clinic, I've worked in the community, I've worked in the state, I've worked in the nation, tried to be an advocate on so many different levels. And that's why I continue to write some of the blogs that you read on my website. Some of those might be more what people would consider to be social activism, and some of that's where my thoughts are these days.
Mm-hmm. And you brought up trust. And trust is so important in both directions. And if you didn't have the experience and the way you present your knowledge, in these books, as instead of as a solution or a guide versus a how-to, that helps build that trust, because you're not sitting up on a pedestal going, "Yep, you got to do it this way. You got to do it that way." And, there's no force. It's like wait a minute. Okay, so if I do this, there's contemplation. You provide that. So if I do this, I could see how that would work. Or if I do that, Willie, little Willie in the back seat, who just dumped over the soda, would that really do for him? My sister and I are polar opposites. My sons were polar opposites in behavioral and reaction and all of that. And what one works for one child most certainly did not work for the other child. And excuse me. And having those, cool, calm, and collected solutions, I'll word it that way, is very beneficial for the parent who's like, help me. So,
well, and there, I guess some of the signposts I've learned for trust along the way are: one is truth.
Yes.
You have to be telling the truth.
Yes.
2 is humility. You have to be humble to know when you don't know the answer.
Yes.
Because you might not know all the answers, but you can, just because you don't know the answer doesn't mean you can't render an opinion, so long as they understand that that's your best guess at the time. 3 is sincere. And then the last one is probably one of the most difficult ones for most of us, is the willingness to be vulnerability.
Yeah.
That's tough, because that's just not, but I think that's one of the, and unfortunately, that's just not something that our political climate allows, is vulnerability.
Not
but
right
it's what defines the human existence. So at least in interpersonal relationships, we need to be willing to recognize that.
Yes.
And express that.
Yes. So let's kind of go back to writing your books. What was your writing process for this? Were you someone who sat down and worked on it every day, or are you, when you had 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there? How did you write your books?
Well, the first 160 op-ed articles that I wrote, I usually composed in my head when I was walking our little Shih Tzu in the mornings.
Yeah.
So when I would get to work, and so over my lunch break, I would write it all out and compose them then. So I had those 160, and then when I finally decided to turn it into a book, I took all that material and figured out how to collate it. I actually did get the services of a editor to help me do that, and then self-published it.
Okay. And so you self-published. What were some of the things that you found to be beneficial in regards to self-publishing?
Well, you can get it out there, but then nobody's going to buy it.
It is a catch-22.
Trying to get the message out there is just without hiring some costly publicist marketing person, it just went nowhere, basically. I mean, I tried as much as I could, and then we did the children's book. We self-published the children's book. That was a painful process initially, because one of the self-publishing companies that I worked with we did not like, so we had to change to a different one. The last book, I did this hybrid arrangement. Okay. Where they put the book together. They did the final editing. They did I paid a price for that. They did some initial marketing and publicity, but still the bulk of that has been left up to me. And the book initially launched March 2020. That might ring a bell as the date that the country shut down from the pandemic. Yep. So all my best attempts at setting up publicity and interviews and everything else went completely for naught. So I'm in the process of trying to regenerate some enthusiasm, essentially relaunch the book. But even that's been difficult. Again, I went through the process of looking at various marketing firms and that sort of thing, and the 5-figure price tags just did not seem like it would be worth the return on investment. So I don't know how to get the message out as best I can, other than this podcast process here initially, and hoping that I can catch lightning in a bottle in some way, shape, or form.
There you go. I like how you word that. And yes, March 2020 changed everything for everyone. And yeah, you can't go out, now you can. We've been able, well, depending on what state you're in, go out and do the book signings and stuff like that. So that was a huge disadvantage because you couldn't go out and be in person and shake that hand of that father who's looking at your book going, wonder if this will help me. You're not able to be, there is something about being face to face with your readers, with your audience. And the fact that you're out there, you're doing the podcast, you're doing the television interviews and so forth. For one, I want to state you are much more courageous than I am, because I'm not sure I could do that. Because again, that vulnerability thing. Because I do this nervous giggle thing a whole lot. And I think if I was to actually be in front of a television camera, that's all I would do, is I would just be a puddle of giggling goo, so, and it's much easier for me to be on this side of a podcast microphone, to ask the questions versus being asked the questions. So I do want to acknowledge that you have a lot of courage for going out there and making yourself vulnerable because you don't know what kind of questions you're going to be asked. Nobody has that script of, these are the questions you're allowed to ask me. So you might get caught off guard and go, oh, wow, how do I answer that one? But yes, marketing has definitely had to take a pivot for not only authors, but anybody who's trying to get a message out there in whatever shape or form. And there's a lot of people who have turned to social media, but then there's a lot of people who are turning away from social media because of the fact that they don't want to see the anger that's been out there, or whether it's, just pick a topic. There's just a tremendous amount of conflict out there. And ironically, in a podcast I recently recorded, social media got brought up, and it was turning it around, that looking at some of these things as not being harmful, but what is the positive? What is the reinforcement that brings me joy? And that is, I go on social media to look up, like my grandsons, if my daughter-in-law has posted pictures of my babies, or how my friend is doing. I've got a friend who's very ill right now, so I keep checking her page to see how she's doing, because she's not able to communicate real well, so someone else is doing the messaging, and flipping it around. So it would be interesting to explore what are some of the helpful and positive ways for marketing and getting our books out there and getting our messages out there. It's going to be interesting to see how all of this pans out.
You also asked about the writing process. I mean, I have a 9:40 a.m. I have a current project that I've sort of, my timeline was to write it during 2020, and here I am near the end of 2021, and it's still sort of languishing. I convinced myself, I rationalized that that's okay, that everything has changed in the last year and a half. Yes. But I now realize that until I sort of fully retire, because I'm very much engaged in a lot of children's advocacy issues, that until I fully retire, I really just need to sort of let things flow. And before I really, I have a good outline. I've written several chapters, but I'm not ready to really sit down and give it all the oomph it needs right now. It's entitled What Really Matters. And it's sort of, again, sort of some experiential things that I've put together that I think sort of defined what really matters.
And what I have found in my experience with helping clients with their books or friends that are writers that are working on their book, and when they have that pause, it's because they haven't experienced what they're to write about. And yes, be gentle on yourself about that, because the more you push to do it, as you know, what happens? You gain more resistance and more frustration, and then your desire to do just kind of melts away. But when you put that twist on that says, wait a minute, maybe I haven't experienced what this book is really about, or I haven't gained that insight. Maybe it's not even that you experience it. Maybe you haven't gotten that insight yet. That once it comes, that pen is not going to stop. Your finger tap dance on the keyboard will not stop. You'll just be there and consumed and putting that material down. So
yeah, you're right, and I continue to realize that experiencing is also, so much of experiencing is reading. And that's the one thing that I've been able to do since retiring is read more. And that material that I realize is going to be impactful on my project. So I'm soaking all that in and processing it.
Well, and the one thing that you continue to mention, like when you were talking about the line above and below the line, and above the line is learning. And that is something that you have brought up numerous times throughout this conversation, is be willing to learn. And, at the end of life, we still don't know it all. I think we're here to expand our knowledge and so forth, and to experience different aspects of life, but we're not supposed to be that know-it-all.
Well, and when I retired, I wrote a blog piece about what's it mean for a pediatrician to retire. And that means you don't have to go to the office, but you never withdraw. You never withdraw from community engagement. You never withdraw from children's advocacy, because that's part of the DNA of being a pediatrician. And so that very much still consumes me. Plus, I still haven't figured out this retirement gig completely. So I'm still working on that one.
Well, in a way, the pandemic helped you adjust, because, you stayed home more than you would have, so it's kind of that catch-22. The pandemic has taught many of us how to sit idle, kind of, sort of, but not really. It tested our ability to sit idle. I should word it that way. So where can people find out more about you, your books? What is your website?
My website is mychildrenschildren.com. Very, very simple. And it has information about me, has information about all the books, has sort of my ongoing blog post, and other press engagements that I've done, interviews and that sort of thing. Try to put all of that there, and it's been interesting to help with that, because I'm not tech savvy at all. So whenever it comes time to upgrade that, I always have to reach out for help.
And I understand. So is there anything that you would like to add to the conversation before we wrap up our time together?
Well, I think that, again, to me, the goal of parenting is raising good citizens. Mm-hmm. When I when I was a youngster, when my parents divorced, I remember my mom saying, "Bob, I just want you to be happy. I just want you to be happy." And I could have simply done that in a very selfish way. Fortunately, she set the example that I didn't, and she showed how to reach out and help others. So to my mind, if parents set the example and be good citizens and raise good citizens, happiness is a secondary effect. Yes. Now, that's sort of a simple way of looking at it, but I think that's the primary goal rather than setting the goal for happiness.
I like that. Yes. Happiness is a side effect. It's not the destination.
Yeah. And whether you're a person of faith or a person of no faith, I think the same tenets apply.
Yes.
Be a good person, help others, care for others, be a good citizen. And happiness will be a nice side effect.
Yes. Well, Bob, thank you. Thank you so much for joining me here in the Pen to Paper Press podcast studio. As you can see, it's comfortable, and thank you. Thank you again.
This has been my pleasure. I've really enjoyed it.
I have too. I have too. Thank you. Before we end our time together, we'd like to say thank you for listening to my conversation with Bob Saul. To access his website and purchase the books he has written, visit pentopaperpress.com/podcast and select the show notes page for this episode. To receive future episodes in your inbox, subscribe to the newsletter and subscribe on your favorite podcast application. You are invited to share your favorite episodes on social media and with individuals who will resonate with the content. The intention of Pen to Paper Press podcast is to reinforce that our words have power and our stories matter. To share this important message, I created several mug designs for you to choose from with my artwork. These are perfect for enjoying your favorite beverages when listening to this podcast series. You will find an array of products available for purchase at pentopaperpress.com/store. Take care, and until next time, keep your pen to paper and write. Your words have power, and your story matters. Bye for now.